the president dropped that 100% tariff number on chips, as well as doubled tariffs on India as well. Does that change your numbers?
So the India tariff does slightly. So we were at an 18.3% average effective tariff rate before. Now we're at 18.6%, although we haven't published that yet, as a result of just the India tariffs. We are digging into what exact trade codes the chips tariff will apply to. So that would probably slightly raise our average effective tariff rate a little bit higher further to, probably the high 18s, I'm guessing. So that would put it at the highest for the U.S. since the early 1930s, the days of the Great Depression and the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. But that also means that it would probably raise all 2025 tariffs would probably raise about $2.8, $2.9 trillion over the next decade. So if they were maintained. So, serious money.
Serious money, yeah. I want you to get to talk to us about what's going on with Apple. The 100% tariffs on chips happened pretty much simultaneously with Tim Cook saying, look, we're going to sink another $100 billion into the U.S. economy over the next 4 years, which brings the total, I think, for Apple to something like $600 billion. So that's a massive amount of money as well. Is that going to necessarily let Apple off the hook? Does it get a free pass? Because, I'm not sure whether, sinking that kind of money in and to plant, factory to build whatever, maybe not iPhones, but iPads or whatever, whether that's the same thing as making chips in the U.S., because that would be totally different. Right now, all their chips are made overseas in Taiwan, TSMC, and the like.
Well, the phrase I keep coming back to with these tariffs, whether on chips or otherwise, is the devil's in the details. And we don't have the details yet on how exactly the chips tariffs are going to work. We did hear from the White House that with some sort of, quote, commitment to produce in the United States, end quote, companies would be exempt from the tariffs. So it's not clear whether you have to put actual money behind the words to get that exemption from the computer chip tariffs, or whether you just need a sort of handshake verbal agreement to produce in the United States. But a lot is going to hinge on that because, despite the fact that there, is a chip industry in the United States, American companies are still very dependent on chips and computer components from overseas. And that's unlikely to change very quickly over the next couple of years, even with a 100% computer chip tariff. So, depending on the exemption, a computer chip tariff has the potential to significantly raise input costs for a lot of advanced manufacturing in the United States over the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, indeed, and not just advanced manufacturing, because chips go into everything these days, which leads to my next question. You probably haven't had time, but, if you could hazard a guess, this 100% tariff on chips, right? How much pass-through is there going to be? What's it going to mean for inflation in the U.S.? And talk to us a little bit more about your favorite metric or gauge, which is very specific. It's the PCE Durable Goods Index, which has shown clearly that tariffs are having an inflationary pass-through effect in the U.S.
Right. So why don't I start there and I can work my way backwards. So we know that durable goods, things like appliances, electronics, furniture, the consumer prices in the United States are rising at an unusual rate year to date. Usually, durable prices fall year to year. So far in 2025, they've risen. In fact, they've risen at the strongest pace over 6 months since 1987, if you ignore the pandemic. So that's a pretty good indication to me, circumstantial, but still pretty good indication that tariffs are driving price increases in specific goods. When we take a step back and we compare the price increases in durable goods that we've seen with the actual tariffs that have been collected so far, we see that consumer pass-through so far in the United States is between 50 to 70% of the actual tariffs. So consumers are not bearing all of the tariffs yet, but they're bearing a majority of the tariffs so far. We also know from import prices in the United States that import prices have barely budged, or if anything, have risen somewhat. If foreign producers were bearing the tariffs, we would expect import prices to fall because the foreign producers would be lowering their prices, to try to maintain demand. So this is telling us that U.S. consumers are absorbing not all, but most of the cost of the tariffs. The remainder is probably almost all being shouldered by American businesses in the form of smaller margins, lower profits right now. And I actually expect that consumer pass-through effect to rise gradually from here over time, from that 50 to 70% to probably something closer to 80 to 90% after several more months.
Okay. So this is almost a sort of a told you so moment, right? Sounds like very much a repeat of what happened during Trump 1, 17 to 21, when, when you do a regression analysis, it shows that, yeah, at the end of the day, the tariffs that the president imposed back then during his first term, almost all of it, it was consumers that had to eat it.
That's exactly right. And, I should say that these are much bigger, broader tariffs this time around. The United States is a big economy. It was, not it was not clear, it was not a foregone conclusion that U.S. consumers were going to bear all or even most of the tariffs this time around, right? The United States is just such a massive economy that maybe it could act as a hegemon and get foreign producers to lower prices. Consumers are so much more price sensitive now than they were back in 2018, thanks to the pandemic inflation that we had. Maybe consumers wouldn't be willing to accept higher goods prices, and businesses were going to have to absorb more of that. So like I said before, it's definitely not 100% the way that it was in 2018, but it still seems to be the vast majority so far being borne by consumers.
And we just had a guest on at the top of the show talking about how, in Fidelity's assessment, 90% of the tariff inflation is actually shared by U.S. importers as well as consumers. Only 10% is absorbed by exporters. But how much of this do you think could be more evenly shared down the road as this tariff situation gets prolonged?
So it's interesting. One of the big debates in economics is how the tariff burden is shared domestically between domestic businesses and domestic consumers. And, there it changes over time. I think early on, businesses bear more of the costs as they sort of feel out, what sort of pricing power they have, where tariff policy is going. And then over time, they pass more and more of that cost on to consumers. But if you're talking about the split between just any American, whether a business or a consumer, and foreign producers, the conclusions of past experience and past research are much more clear. Foreign producers bear very little, if any, of the tariff on average. There are always specific cases where you can see a specific foreign company saying, we'll eat the tariff for now, maybe as a promotion, or we had to lower prices because of this, that, or this reason involving tariffs. There are anecdotes of that happening, but when you take a step back and you look at the average price data, it is very consistent with what we have just found over and over again, both through actual experience and through research in the past, which is that foreign producers end up eating very little of the cost.